morning, everybody. My name's Tara Hartnett. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
I'm Steve.
I'm Veronica.
Lovely. So today, this is about racism and what racism has been put towards Aboriginal people. So we're going to discuss about their background, and we're also going to discuss a lot of other stuff. So it's going to be very important stuff. So we've got a PowerPoint presentation here as well. So we're going to talk about. Does anyone know about the White Australian policy? No? Okay, so if we turn to the White Australian policy. Okay, so we're going to watch a video, and while that video is going, I'll be talking about the White Australian policy.
Welcome to Australia. This country is
The beginning of the White Australian policy can be found in the 1850s in Australia. As the number of British prisoners declined in Australia, Australia was forced to import the labour needed to work in its mines because of the declining number of prisoners. Only instead of importing people from Europe, Australia brought people in from China and the Pacific Islands. Australia turned to the Chinese as an available and easily acquirable labour force. The Chinese were first imported into country prior to the 1850s as obligation labour and used on sheep farms.
Your language skills today. First, translate this sentence to English.
This caused unrest among the citizens of Australia because of the Chinese were willing to work for lower wages, work longer, and more in the government in the Victorian province was alarmed at the rapidly increasing number of Chinese immigrants during the years of 1853 and 1857. The population rose from 2,000 to 40,000 Chinese. So Victoria passed a law in 1855 to restrict the number of Chinese immigrants who could come through its ports, that only forced the Chinese to seek other ways of entering the country. New South Wales passed the same laws in the 1850s and the early 1860s.
So would you have him taken away?
At the same time that the Chinese were being kept from entering Australia,
everyone thinks they can get into Australia.
I know. This is a country of English. It is for us only.
Well, Africans are good people. After all, I am half African.
Get out of Australia. English only.
But I have lived in Australia for 10 years. I pretty much am English.
You are an illegal immigrant. Get out of Australia.
Dear Greg. No. So what did you learn about from that video?
Very racist.
Yes. Yeah. So to be able to get into Australia back when the White Australian policy started, you had to be able to translate a sentence from European, and you had to write that in English. If you did not know how to write that in English, you were declined to be able to come into Australia. So, at the same time, the Chinese were being kept from entering Australia. Pacific Islanders were being recruited from Malaysia and the Solomon Islands in particular to work in the sugar plantations on the coast of Queensland. Excuse me. The islanders, often called Kanaka, were forced to live in a state of obligated slavery and had to work under extremely harsh conditions. In an attempt to control the growing death rate of Kanakas, the Queensland government passed the Polynesian Labourers Act 1868 and another act in 1883 to control the number of Kanakas being imported and the environment in which they were living. In 1896, the anti-immigration laws were extended in 5 of the colonies to all people of coloured races. Australia passed laws requiring all immigrants to take a test. This test required immigrants who did not appear to be of European origin to write a passage in the European language, which the immigrants usually did not know. If this was not able to pass the test, they were not allowed to enter the country. Restriction Bill, a person was passed and extended the dictation test to include all people of the non-European origin and became known as the official White Australian policy. This policy also prohibited the insane people likely to become a charge upon. Example, mentally handicapped, any person suffering from disease, from entering the Commonwealth. Also prohibited were prostitutes, criminals, and those who had a contract to perform manual labour within the Commonwealth. So as you've seen in that video, you've seen someone behind bars. That was a criminal. He wasn't allowed to come into Australia because he was a criminal. So the ending of the White Australian policy ended during the Second World War. Australia requested only white soldiers be sent for their protection, but the United States refused the request and only mixed racial troops went. Australia was forced to allow the soldiers into the country in order to have protection from Japan. Australia passed laws allowing the refugees who had married Australians and Japanese war brides to remain in the country. In 1957, those people of non-European ethnicity who had lived in Australia for 15 years were allowed citizenship. And the 1958 Immigration Act was passed, which made it easier to gain citizenship and got rid of the dictation test. Before we continue, I just wanted to let you know that if there is an evacuation, we need to go through that door and go to the car park where there will be an assembled line where we'll have to do a roll call to make sure that everyone here is accounted for. I just thought I would get that in there before we start talking more about what this means. And also, if you go down to the, if you keep walking down out the corridor just behind me, you'll see that there's a toilet there. So if you do need to go, feel free to go. Relevant legislation. So we've got the Racial Discrimination Act, Equal Employment Opportunity, Human Rights Act. We've also got your direct discrimination and your indirect discrimination. So it's expected that all individuals, including yourselves and the organisations, to keep up to date with the relevant legislation used at Southside Community Services. You need to be able to keep up with all the current legislations and the code of practice here that we have at this service. Okay, if we go to the next page, which is statistics. There is a 1 in 5 that have said that they would discriminate against someone from another culture in certain situations. 1 in 10 would tell jokes about Indigenous Australians, avoid Indigenous Australians, and also on public transport or not hire an Indigenous Australian for a job. 1 in 5 admit they would move away if an Indigenous Australian sat near them. 1 in 5 admit they would watch the action of an Indigenous Australian in a retail environment. So now we're going to be talking about child abuse, neglect and poverty. Do you guys all know what child abuse, neglect and poverty are? Yes. Yeah? Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children are more than 5 times more likely to be subject of child protection suspension. The non-Aboriginal and Torres Strait children, which often leads to juvenile and adult involvement in the criminal justice system. It is widely accepted that there is a close link between child abuse, neglect, and the broader issues of poverty, in all indicators of which Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are the most disadvantaged people in Australia. So we're going to go to types of discrimination that Australian Indigenous people experience. So, what is racism? Do any of you know what racism is? Yeah. Yep. So, what sort of racism do you think that Aboriginal people get? Like, what do you think that? What sort of racism happens to them? Like, any of you know?
They get treated differently because of
the culture,
Yep.
colour.
Yep. Any other issues you reckon?
I think a lot of white Australians are more jealous because of the benefits they get from the government.
Yep, absolutely.
And they're
Violence
jealous.
towards them.
Yeah,
Yep, that's right. So the racial, we're going to talk about the Racial Discrimination Act. So a lot of Aboriginal get their employment terminated. They get denied employment. They also get denied promotions, transfers, and employment-related benefits. So they don't get a lot of benefits to do with the workforce. They often get denied training opportunities, and they get harassed a lot. So they get, as we were saying, that a lot of people are jealous of the way that Aboriginal people get so many benefits. They get housing support. They get lots of support from our service providers such as Centrelink. So racial hatred. So in this is an extension to our Racial Discrimination Act. So it's basically just anything really being racially offensive during the internet, on social media, newsletters, newspapers, anything that can really offend a Aboriginal person or any other person that's from a different culture, that this can happen to. So that's the types of discrimination that can happen. Also, our current issues of marginalisation for Australian Indigenous people. Marginalised is when individuals living in the fringes of society, because of their compromised or severely limited access to resources and opportunities needed to fully participate to live in a decent life. Marginalised people to experience a complex combination of economic, social, health, disadvantage, stigma, and have poorer outcomes relative to other Australians. Marginalised people are being referred to being significantly more than likely to other Australians have suffered parental divorce, parental unemployment, leaving school at an early age, leaving home at an early age, as indicators of long-term disadvantage. The majority of marginalised individuals are receiving government welfare benefits and rely on support for their income. This means these people are significantly lower from the rest of the population, places them at higher levels of disadvantage. They are likely living in housing with high rents, having difficulties meeting their everyday needs, and have high credit card debts. They often experience social isolation, so they have no friends, they have very few contacts, they don't have that assistance to be able to ask help, they can't contact their community service providers, they can't contact community services like Southside. We're going to go through our protective factors. Social injustice arises from physical discrimination and abuses of power of relationships, rights, opportunities, resources. Social protection is a concept developed to challenge the drivers of social elimination. Social protection can be defined as all public and private initiatives and provide income or consumption transfers to the poor, protect the vulnerable against likelihood risk, and enhance the social status of rights of the marginalised. Social injustice is a situation where some unfair practices are being carried out. It arises from physical discrimination and abuses the power. So it just basically abuses the power in the relationships, rights, and opportunities. So as a community service worker, you need to take in consideration the vulnerability and the risk for marginalised people with their potential flexibility and a capacity for change. Places such as justice, health, welfare, and educational systems. These types of systems can be empowering, enable individual cooperative action to enhance well-being, or they can be limiting, especially when they leave. So some of these considerations can be moving from a government income to their self-support income, going from being able to remain home at ages of 18, getting education and training, seeking community health support, that's including the physical and emotional, mental health needs. So these are some of the needs that some Aboriginal need. They've got a lot of mental health issues. Listening, linking with communities to reduce isolation. So linking with them so that they've actually got someone to talk to. They can actually talk to someone about the way they're feeling, making friends. And I think that's it, that one. Trauma for Indigenous people. It's well documented that marginalised people suffer increased health issues as a result of discrimination, ethnicity, race, culture, or sexual orientation. Social and emotional well-being for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders encompasses more than mainstream concepts and appreciates not just the physical well-being, and the individual, but the social, emotional, cultural well-being of the community. Indigenous beliefs, itself, identity and meaning are complex and includes family, kinship and other clan groups. The intergenerational cycle of grief, trauma, stress is cumulative and impacts on a person's ability to function. Psychological trauma is generally understood as the response of the mind and nerve system to be a life-threatening experience that is so overwhelming it leaves the individual unable to come to terms with it. The traumatic event may not be able to directly experience. It can include threats to other victims, has a relationship or those nearby. Witnessing or hearing about these traumatic experience or another can have lasting psychological impact. A person's response or trauma involves intense fear, hopelessness or horror. In children, trauma responses may include disorganized or agitated behavior. Legal and ethical issues relevant for your organisation. So code of conduct. Most organisations will have a code of conduct for their employers. A code of conduct is a document that outlines the organisation's missions, their values, their ethics, their visions. It provides a well-defined standard and expectations for the employer's professional conduct. Personal and professional boundaries. Boundaries provide necessary emotional distance to ensure client safety. Boundaries are set and maintained by the professional worker and their relational responsibility to the client. As a community service worker, you're required to provide your client with clear information relating to your working relationship. Boundary crossing. A boundary crossing is a variance to common accepted practices that could potentially benefit the client. So a violation would be breaching a client-worker relationship. So starting a relationship with another client, so being in an intimate relationship. Any causes that could harm your client, unethical behaviour by the workplace, workers' actions may be harmful or exploitative. Duty of care. Duty of care refers to a person's obligation to take reasonable care to avoid injury to another person where it can be foreseen. May be injured or by action or inaction. A duty of care exists when a person's actions could reasonably be expected to affect other people. As a community service worker, you will need to take reasonable care to predict any harm or any future harm to a client. Does everyone sort of understand everything that I'm sort of saying now? Yeah? Reflecting on own values, beliefs and biases. A person's culture, language, social interests, goals, cognitions, values, especially if different from clients and colleagues, could conceivably create a barrier to understanding communication when working with culturally diverse clients and colleagues. Workers can break through this barrier by reflecting on their knowledge and learning to recognise and respect clients' language, literacy, literature, difference in cultural ways of knowing. It is important to understand, even though we may believe we see and treat people as valued equals, hidden biases may still influence our perceptions and actions. It is argued that stereotypes prejudice linger in most of us, and those biases can have impact on our life. As a worker, you need to unpack your assumptions, your stereotypes and your biases, and understand and respect the different sort of nationalities that are in this workplace. So you need to get over all your assumptions, all your stereotypes, because you need to stop discriminating against other people in this workplace. Using the cultural values and belief systems of ethnically diverse clients and colleagues, workers may successfully engage in reflective practice in order to gain understanding of their own cultural biases. It is essential to this reflective process that your understanding of how bias works towards the culture. So some of the communication strategies. Accept that quite a lot of your own behaviour is ruled, governed. You're a member of a culture which regulates your behaviour. Don't make assumptions. Don't draw conclusions. Don't assume things. Accept cultural differences as reality. So accept that there is an Aboriginal person working at this workplace. Accept that there's an Australian person working at this workplace. Accept that there's another culture working at this workplace. It's mainly just being accepting and accepting that there's other cultures that work at this workplace, so we can all work together to make sure that we're getting along. Remember that you do not judge another culture. Don't make the mistake of thinking that the people in your culture are diverse individuals, whereas the people in other cultures. Accept that although goodwill and tolerance provide a reasonable start, they are not enough. Look at the knowledge, awareness and skill. Don't feel that you have to change your culture. Remember that your aim is to become more skilled, a skilled communicator or a better person. Okay, then we've got try to avoid discounting. I don't like people, but I like someone, he's different. If you're reacting positively by one person from culture, there will be many other people in that culture you will relate to. He or she is not necessarily different. If you meet someone from another culture whom you don't like, don't generalise. Don't automatically assume that that person's negative behaviour is due to and typical of their culture. Accept that stereotyping is inevitable. Be aware that you are doing it. Try to diminish it if possible. Finally, be realistic. Realise that interpersonal matters, intercultural communication can be enjoyable. And our last slide, language barriers. Keeping an open mind, being alert, being aware that gender roles may differ and that there may be reason for organising a separate women-only group, ensuring that women are adequately represented, seeking to understand the protocols of diverse ethnic community groups, developing an empathy with understanding others who may have experienced great traumas, being willing to provide information and to encourage and seek input from community groups, being aware that some CALD groups and individuals may distrust the motives of some organisations, and being willing to learn and adapt. Anyone have any questions? So does everyone understand that we shouldn't discriminate against other cultures because we believe in other things, and that because just because someone else gets more support, as you're going through this, did you realise that, oh wow, Aboriginal people do really get disadvantaged at a lot of opportunities? Yeah? How about you? Yeah? Okay, so if there's any questions, make sure you ask me. I've also got the questionnaires there, so if you could fill them out for me, that would be great. Have a lovely day, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.